Hello and welcome back to the Light Club with NiSi UK. Thank you all very much for joining us again this evening. My name is Kim Grant. I'm an outdoor photographer in Scotland and I'm going to be your host for this series over the next coming months. Last month we had the delight of interviewing Stephen Hanna, and next month we're going to be interviewing another photographer for you all. But this evening we're going to do something slightly different, and over the last week we've been asking many of you to submit some of your images to us tonight so that we can do a little critiquing session and showcase to you all basically all these lovely images you've taken, but how important in many ways filters are in achieving the results, and also critiquing the images to see whether there's anything that you guys could potentially improve with your photography or anything you could have done differently. But I've got to say all the images that have been submitted for this evening are of a very high standard. So what we're probably going to do is look through them all one by one and talk you through why they work. So if any of you are watching this evening and want to take amazing photographs like all these photographers who have submitted these images have, it will give you many hints and tips of what you can do in order to achieve those results, and also, of course, how filters can potentially be used to help you to gain the same sort of results that these photographers have. So as well as talking about the filters, of course, we'll be talking about composition, how the images have been shot, and the overall kind of pros and cons of each image. So I think we'll get started now with image number 1, and we'll showcase them all to you. So here we begin with a beautiful image by Danny Wilson, and this was taken in the North York Moors. And of course, it's using a few NiSi filters here. We've got the landscape circular polarizer, as well as a ND grad filter, a medium 3-stop filter there as well. So as I say, all the images that have been submitted this evening, I think, are of a very high standard. So I'm going to talk you through basically what works well with all these images and how they've managed to, achieve the images with the filters they've used. So this image compositionally is fantastic in many ways. You've got this beautiful tree, of course, that you've got taking up the center of the frame here, very well, nicely weighted there on the top of the image in the center. And because you've got the sun coming from behind the tree, it's allowing for these beautiful areas down here to be illuminated by the light that is shining through the center of the tree there, which is of course illuminating the heather in the foreground, which is absolutely beautiful. When it comes to landscape photography, of course, you're wanting to look at where the light is within the frame and how it interacts with the landscape. So this is a fantastic shot here to showcase how the light coming through that tree is causing the heather to light up. But the other good thing here is the fact that because the sunset light has been positioned behind the tree, you've got this lovely almost diffused effect going on here. So I'm sure when many of you have shot the sunrise or sunset in the past, you'll know how harsh the light can be at this time of day when it gets low on the horizon. When you're shooting straight into the sunset or sunrise, you get that massive glowing light coming from the sun as you'd expect. And quite often in photographs, this can be blown out in many instances. But by positioning it behind the tree, like Danny has here, it kind of eliminates that blown out effect. But of course, he's also used the ND medium grad filter here on the sky, which has also allowed him to bring down some of the exposure in the sky there and allow him to have that leveled out with the foreground interest of the heather within this image. So there's so many things about this image that works. As I say, compositionally it works. The exposure is very, very good here. But that use definitely of the ND grad filter here has allowed him to achieve this effect within, the field. And of course, there's many people now who potentially may achieve this effect in post-processing or by doing, multiple exposures and blending them together. But one of the great things about using an ND grad in the field is that you get that result straight away within one image. And you can really see here how using that graduated filter has allowed him to achieve this. And I'd imagine as well, through using the circular polarizer, it will have allowed him to bring out quite a lot of the colour within the heather as well here, which is beautiful. One of the great things about circular polarizers is not only do they affect the sky and allow you to bring out more of that colour and density around the clouds and remove reflections from water. Another great thing they can do is bring out more colour in certain landscapes and images. It works particularly well when things are wet, or in, you know, when you're working with woodland scenes and everything. But on scenes like this as well, using that kind of landscape polarizer can allow more of the colour and the depth and the contrast to be brought out within the heather too. So a fantastic image there for us to start the evening off with, I'm sure you'll all agree. And as I say, a fantastic result there on how using an ND grad filter in order to achieve that exposure has worked really, really well. So I'm now going to bring up the next image for you all. There we go. As I say, again, this is the standard tonight with these images is fantastic. And this is another great shot here by Sam Hodgson. And this is taken at Saltwick Bay. He's also used a polarizing filter, and he's also used a medium 3-stop filter as well. And I think this is one thing to mention here I've kind of realized is you obviously get the soft edge filters and the hard edge filters, but one of the great things about NiSi is that you've got that medium edge. And I find, particularly within my work, that I use the medium edge graduated filters way more than the soft or the hard edge, because you get a little bit more, it's because obviously it's in the middle, you've not got the same diffuseness that the soft edge has, but you've not got that harsh line that the hard edge filter has. So when you're photographing shots like this, where there isn't quite a defined horizon on itself, and you've got things like within this shot here, you've obviously got the boat intersecting the horizon, as well as this peninsula here of the headland intersecting the horizon as well. Of course, the medium edge works really well because it's that in-between stage where you've not got that definite horizon, but you've also not got a mountainous region, for instance, where the horizon is really not defined. So this image, again, compositionally, it works incredibly well, as I'm sure many of you will agree. And there's many reasons for that. First of all, we've got the rule of thirds being used here. So we've got, of course, the horizon is on the top third line there, which allows you to create that nice scene there within the image. And you've got foreground interest here that's been created by these lines within the rock, which also acts as a sort of leading line. Although it doesn't lead right through the image, you've got that nice broken area that leads pretty much out of the bottom corner right through the image, taking you through the first third of the image, which then leads you on to this, what I imagine is a shipwreck here, which gives you, again, that kind of depth and that motion of moving through the scene. The shipwreck is obviously the main focal point here, so you've got that nice weighted area in the image where your eye gets drawn to. And this is, of course, lovely, coupled with the beautiful colours of the sky here. And again, by using that ND grad filter, it's allowed him to create an image where the sky is nice and the exposure is that of, the same of what's going on in the foreground as well. So again, you don't have that blown out areas that you may potentially get without using an ND grad filter. And it's allowed Sam to be able to get this lovely image where the exposure is, continuous throughout the image without any really dark areas or any really bright areas. And again, I'd imagine for him taking this shot here, the polarizer, when you look at this image here, if I just get rid of these lines that I've used, you'll see there's some sheen going on in this image, in this part of the photograph here, where the light is reflecting on the wet rocks of this image. But within the actual foreground itself, you've not got that, which is really, really nice, because if you'd had that reflection of light going through the whole image, you almost probably would have been quite overpowered by that in the foreground. But by having this darker foreground area at the front here, again, it's kind of allowing the image to be weighted so that you've got that really nice exposure. And because you've got that nice dark area at the bottom, it nicely complements the dark area of the boat as well. So again, it's kind of coupling different kind of areas here and allowing that depth to be brought out. And, with the polarizer as well and getting rid of that reflections on the wet rock in the foreground, it's really allowing this zigzag line to come out within the image, which again just adds that contrast and depth to the image. So again, this image has obviously been achieved very well with filters, but compositionally it's a cracking image that allows that interest and that story to be told. And it's been shot at one of the golden hours, which is often one of the best times of day to shoot. Both of the images we've looked at so far have showcased how shooting at either sunrise or sunset particularly can allow you to have that lovely light coming through the landscape, and how that light then interacts with the subjects within the image. In the last image, you had it interacting with the tree and coming through onto the heather. And in this image, you've got it lovely lighting up the sky and interacting with the wetness of the rock, which really brings out the definition and clarity and contrast within the shapes in the rock, as well as the boat itself. So yeah, again, there's nothing I don't think in this image that I could recommend to improve at all. It's very well shot, and I'm sure you'll all agree that the use of filters as well as the composition here is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, huge well done there, Sam. And I'll just get the next image for you all, which is this shot here. So this shot has been taken by Sebastian Bevan, and it's of Brixham breakwater. And he's used the NiSi 15mm f4 lens to achieve this shot. And again, like the last two images, you can see here just how important shooting often at golden hour can be, especially in landscape photography. You know, other outdoor photography genres, isn't always such a important part of the day, but definitely when you're shooting landscapes, again, you can see in this image how much shooting at that time of day has brought a lot of color and vibrancy to this image and really brought the scene to life. So you can kind of see by this shot, by using the wide angle that he's used within this image, which of course you'd get with a 15mm lens, it gives you that ultra wide angle view. And you can see that how you've got the pier here, you know, it's being kind of stretched out from the corner and allowing the whole pier to be included, but also it's allowed that ultra wide angle feel of the image here to include a lot of the sea as well. But most importantly, I think the use of the wide angle here has allowed him to capture the whole of the sunset or the sunrise. You know, having this massive arch here without an ultra wide angle lens, you would have ended up just capturing a little bit of it, which obviously both images would have worked really well depending on what feeling you wanted to achieve within your image. But, you know, quite often when you're shooting at this time of day, you can get half of the sky completely lit up. And, you know, when you're using a lens that's not ultra wide angle, you often don't manage to incorporate this in your image. So it's interesting to see his choice of lens here and how it's produced this image and the feeling behind it. I always say to people it's very important to think about the story behind your photographs. And when we're out doing photography, I think everybody's often captivated by different things and want to tell slightly different stories within their photography. So like if I was to shoot this image, for instance, I probably would have gone to the end of the pier and had the lighthouse that's situated there very prominent in my frame, and potentially use some of the wall that's leading out here just on the right hand side of my frame coming out the bottom right hand corner, and just eliminated some of the sky behind it to show that fieriness, but to really emphasize the lighthouse, which of course is a personal preference, but that's probably how I would have shot this scene if I had been there. But it's really interesting to see how another photographer has gone there, and through the use of an ultra wide angle lens, he's been able to capture the whole scene. And of course, that beautiful sky here also works incredibly well against the water. You know, as you look at the water down here in the sea, you've got that lovely reflected light there that's coming off of the sky, which gives nice depth and texture to the bottom half of the image. I almost feel with this shot, the only thing I would maybe say here with this image that you've taken is the fact that the top of the image, it's quite a lot of negative space with not much going on. I almost wonder whether maybe cropping that out of the image and having a lot more emphasis on just the pier, the sea, and that arcing light and cloud there that you've got might have just eliminated some of that space on the top and really honed in on the really interesting elements of this image. But again, I say it's very interesting to see how every different photographer interprets scenes differently. But again, when you think about what's the interest here, and the interest, of course, is the beautiful sunset or sunrise sky here being lit up the clouds across that band, which the wide angle lens has allowed you to achieve. But by cropping in the top of the image there, it would really emphasize that and further bring it to life. So yeah, it's always thinking about what your story is behind your image and incorporating the scene to achieve that. But yeah, another great image, another great shot showcasing, you know, how shooting at this time of day particularly can create very interesting lights and images. So the next image we have this evening is this shot here. So this was taken by Brian Nicholson, and it's of the Pentland Hills, and he's used a circular polarizer and a soft 3-stop ND graduated filter. And again, you can see here another very orangey golden image. Of course, these time of days are very popular with landscape photographers, as I've already said. But you can see here how that golden light has really made this image come to life. And how, again, the use of an ND grad filter has allowed Brian to achieve an even exposure throughout this image. So, of course, because he's shooting a mountainous region here, the soft ND grad works the best out of probably between the soft, medium, and hard edge, because you've got a varying degree of mountain pinnacles here. You know, you've got some that are a little bit further down, and then you've got these more kind of towering ones at this side. So again, a hard edge wouldn't work here because you'd have that really big, obvious line going through your scene. And a medium edge potentially would have worked okay here, but the great thing when you're shooting mountainous regions, when you use a soft edge ND filter, is it allows you to really allow for that softness between the sky and the landscape, so that you get that nice even tone, which has definitely been achieved here. You can see this image is a panoramic image that allows for the whole scene to be photographed and achieved here. Which is beautiful, and compositionally it works really well because you've got the mountains on the bottom half of the frame with the sky on the top half of the frame. But because there is so much going on in the sky with the different heights of clouds you've got going on here, the different streaks, the different colours and the different shapes, it allows weight to be achieved both on the bottom half of the image and the top half of the image, giving a very nicely balanced image here as well. So again, you can see how much of a difference using a graduated ND filter can have on your landscape images. And again, you can see just how much shooting at this time of day can make a difference. And a bit like when we were speaking to Stephen last month, you know, he had a mixture of panoramic images that he was speaking through with us and your sort of generic landscape shots as well. And you can just see how changing between those different types of photography and different ways of capturing a landscape can just create something a little bit different within the scene. And of course, shooting mountainous regions particularly works very well in panorama. So yeah, again, there's nothing I can really critique about this image because it's very well shot, very well exposed. There's a good story going on here. And again, filters have been used to maximize the image. So yeah, very well done to you as well, Brian. And our next image is this one here. This one has been taken by Irvin, and it's in the Scottish Highlands. And he's used, again, a landscape circular polarizer, but he's also used a 10-stop filter here as well. So we can kind of see from this image how using the circular polarizer has allowed him to sort of cut through, probably because it's quite misty in the top half of the frame. You kind of can see the mist coming in from the top here. So by using that polarizer would have allowed him to cut through some of that mist and bring out some more of the detail and density within particularly the top sort of tree line here, which allows, like I say, more of that contrast and density to be felt here. And we also had within that image the 10-stop filter as well. So you can see that this river here, or stream or loch, has been nicely smoothed out. Because it was shot during the day, you can often find, you know, 10-stop filters. You don't always get that complete crispy, silky smooth feel during the day if the light is very harsh. But it's allowed him to slow down this water enough to stop it being, I'd imagine by the looks of what it's achieved, it was probably quite a choppy day here, and the water wasn't particularly smooth. So it's allowed him to kind of smooth that out and bring out quite a lot of different textures here within the water and a different feel to what it potentially would have been without it. You often find, you know, I've been shot in the Scottish Highlands many times. It's a very almost peaceful place, and you usually want to kind of bring that out within your photograph. So if you've got a really windy day with a lot of churning water within the waterways, it can be nice just to smooth that out to help with that nice calming feel that the Highlands give you here. I'd almost ask in some ways, particularly exactly what the story is within this image. So when I look at this shot, you've got quite a lot going on. You've got the nice mistiness at the top half of the image, which comes in nicely with these trees here, which could potentially be a shot in itself if you were to zoom in and completely isolate some of the trees. And then you've then got this very prominent tree line here, which again is almost like another part of the story here, which then goes into these trees on the horizon. And then of course you've got this telegraph pole by the looks of it running through the bottom of your image, and then at the bottom you've got the waterway. So I almost feel like in some ways there's so many parts to this image and so many different elements of it that it almost feels in some ways that there's quite a lot going on. And I kind of almost wonder whether potentially zooming in here and eliminating certain elements of the landscape might have just brought out a little bit more of different stories within this scene and allowed you to capture something that was really, really striking and had a really interesting story behind it. But the use of, like I say, filters here has allowed you to bring out quite a lot within the image. Compositionally, it's pretty good because you've got the nice kind of layered effect going on within the image as well here. But I almost feel like because this telegraph pole is so small within the image, it kind of eliminates in some way, the exact story behind the photograph here. But overall, it's an interesting image, and the tones and that within this image allows for that, kind of duskiness that you can get on a really misty day within the Highlands. So, yeah, another interesting image, and well done for sending that in. I'm just going to bring up the next one now. So this image here is of a lighthouse by Paul Thomson, which is the St. Peter Port Lighthouse. And he's used a UV filter here in order to achieve this, which is really interesting actually, because of course we're shooting this with the light flashing. So I'd imagine the UV filter would have been used here to, kind of prevent so much of that light coming through and hitting the lens and allow just some of that glare to have come off here within the image so that the light isn't so prominent within the scene. So this is a really interesting shot because it's obviously been converted to black and white, which has allowed for the emphasis here to be placed on the drama of the scene. So it's always something to consider when you're shooting in dramatic weather, which this scene, of course, was, because you've got these very prominent crashing waves coming over here over the sea and crashing against what I imagine would be some sort of wall. So you've got that going on here, which converted to black and white allows you to bring out a lot of the tones within the sea. Because the surf of the sea and the white areas when the waves crash against stuff are, really white and interesting, and you've often got the white kind of horses going through the sea as well. Converting images like this to black and white can really emphasize that impact. And of course, what I like here is obviously the lights flashing. So I imagine this was probably taken at twilight, probably wasn't taken during the night because obviously the light would have been really dark. So being able to capture these crashing waves probably wouldn't have been possible. So I imagine this was taken probably around twilight, where the photographer was able to get a quick enough shutter speed to freeze those waves there. But yeah, a very interesting and dramatic image, showcases something different here. You've not got the sunset and sunrise colours, and I imagine it was a very gloomy sort of day. So, a way of getting around that if you're shooting at times of the day or in dramatic weather, and times maybe when the light's quite flat, for instance, converting to black and white can really bring images to life. So it's a great example here of creating atmosphere with that black and white shot. And creating drama within your image. So yeah, another interesting shot there, but showcasing something completely different within the scene and how black and white can really emphasize photographs. So yeah, fantastic. Well done, Paul. And the next image here is this one. So this was taken by Scott. This is Marwick Heads, and this was taken using a circular 10-stop ND filter. So this is probably our first example here of a proper long exposure image. And when people generally think about filters, most people think about your generic ND filters in order to achieve that long exposure effect. And of course, long exposure photography is very popular for many people. Not everybody likes it, but it does allow you to create a lot of interest, especially when you've not got particularly interesting light within your photographs or on the day that you go out shooting. So as you can see here, this image was taken on quite a flat, dull grey day. But by using the 10-stop filter, it's allowed for the image to be slowed down, and it's also allowed for some colour in many ways to be captured within this scene. So within this photograph, you've got the lovely blue tones. You've got nice light blue tones there and dark blue tones here. And you've got this beautiful, subtle but green here. And because it's quite subtle within the scene, it really plays with that dull, dreary day. But what you find on days like this is, like I say, when the light's flat and disinteresting, using that 10-stop filter allows you to create interest where there possibly wasn't any because of the light. And you can really see that here with the sea stack in the center of the frame and how the waves and everything have been slowed down, and you've got that nice frothy effect. And you've got these nice wispy lines coming out here where there's the surf and the sea going in different currents. So yeah, using the 10-stop ND here has allowed this photographer to create something of interest. And compositionally, this photograph works really well. You've got this lovely area here coming out, allowing a nice foreground. You've got another, foreground area here, but with this leading line that leads you through, which then leads you on to the centered sea stack. And of course, you've got the rule of thirds being used here with the horizon on the top third of the image, which allows for a very nice foreground, middle ground, and background scene to be captured here. I wonder whether potentially using a graduated filter here on the sky might have just allowed you to bring down the exposure of the sky slightly, which could have brought out more of these clouds. What I see within these clouds is there's clearly a lot of definition within this bottom area here. And you can also see that there's some nice areas here that have got quite a lot of definition within them. And I almost wonder whether bringing down the exposure on that clouds might have allowed them to appear a lot more dramatic within the photograph, which could have created a more dramatic scene overall, which would have allowed for darker blues and that to be seen, which would have really complemented the sea. But yeah, compositionally it works really well. A fantastic showcase here of what a 10-stop ND filter can do. But again, just to kind of think about the sky here and potentially allowing that to be a bit more dramatic could have allowed this image to have a little bit more drama to it, which might have been quite interesting to see. But yeah, on the whole, a fantastic image. So well done there. And the next image we'll be taking up is okay. We have to go to. So I appear to be missing one image here, so we're going to have to go to this one here. So this has been taken by Zibitsu, and this is the Cow's Mouth Quarry, and he's used no filters here. So this has got a really interesting image in many ways because it's completely different to anything we've seen tonight. And of course, it's completely different to sort of your generic landscape images, where you've got that very obvious colour within your scene or that black and white scene that's allowing you to create something really, dramatic, and those, stereotypical landscape shots that we maybe saw earlier on this evening. So this is a very creative image, I would say, in many ways. Of course, it's been edited to have this effect within it. And a bit like long exposure photography, this sort of editing and way of doing photography, of course, isn't for everybody. But the great thing about photography is that it's a very creative thing, and it's an art form in many ways. So I'm always very open to people trying different things within their photography, both out in the field as well as through editing. And as you can see with this shot here, the edit in many ways has allowed this image to become quite dramatic. There's a lot going on in this photograph in many ways. You've got this rocky area here, which in itself has got a lot of textures and patterns within it. You've got this very prominent rock here, which I'd say is the main focal point of the image, which really stands out. You could almost say there's a face at this bit here, which is quite interesting to see. But then the clouds in themselves are very, very dramatic. You've got this line going across here. You've got all this wispiness coming up here. And yeah, it's a very dramatic image. And it's kind of showcasing how maybe not using filters in your photography, which of course you don't have to do for landscape photography all the time, or even at all if it doesn't suit you. But this image showcases in many ways how the editing process can allow you to achieve different results. So yeah, it's a very different image in many ways, and a very creative image, as I've said. Again, I'm almost wondering exactly what the story is here, because I feel the way this image has been edited, there's so much going on, and the viewer's eye is constantly being competing here between the shapes and the rocks up to the wispy clouds within the image as well. There's a lot going on and a lot for the eye to see. But of course, it's been edited to bring out that drama within the scene, I'd imagine, and to bring out the textures within the clouds and the rocks. So you can see by this editing style how doing that has brought out more of the textures within this photograph and allowed something different to be achieved. So yeah, a very interesting image there, something very, very different. And it just showcases all the different things that you can do with photography, which makes it very diverse and in many ways open to everybody, which is great to see. So yeah, well done for trying something different and for going out there and creating this image. And the final image we have is this one here. Load, sorry, it's taking a wee minute. And there we go. So this image is by Dave, and it's taken in Thornham, and it's been taken with a medium 2-stop ND grad filter. So this is kind of a bit like what I was saying a minute ago, of more of your sort of stereotypical landscape shots, and you know, the kind of beauty that can be created by photographing in this way. And this is a really nice image, I think, to finish this evening on, because it's a really interesting shot. Compositionally, it's very well shot. You've got this lovely pool of water here coming out of the bottom left-hand side of the image. You've got a leading line that has been created here by the side of the pond, or the pool of water, which leads very nicely into this boat wreck here. So you've got that lovely, the photograph flows here. You've got that lovely line flowing into there. You've of course got this beautiful reflection going on here with these two bits of wood that are reflecting nicely here. And as many people know, using odd numbers in photography works really well. So you've got these 3 reflected bits here. So you've got that 3. You could say you've got the 3 with the 2 bits of wood in the boats, but you've also got this bit here in the background as well, which is given the odd number of 3 there as well. So yeah, compositionally, this is a great image. The light's been captured very well here. There's interest going on. You've got colour here with the flowers, as well as the reflection, the grass and the boat. And you can see by using that ND grad here on the sky that it's allowed him to bring out some of the definition here within the clouds, so that you can see this area here. And this would have been quite a clear night or morning, I'd imagine, judging by the sky in this image. So although this area up here is still very bright, that is probably what the sky would have looked like. I get the sense with this shot that the light would have been coming in from the sides, or potentially even behind the photographer, and this would have been that bright sky that you get on the other side of the landscape and the sky at this time of day. But this showcases, like the images earlier on this evening with the golden light, while shooting that golden light works really, really well, it's great to shoot away from it sometimes and shoot in the opposite direction, because you can get a totally different feel. So when you shoot directly into the sunset, although you might get the colours and the orange glow, you can often be battling against quite harsh light. Whereas if you shoot your images with the sun behind you or coming in from the side, you get that really nice side light coming into the image, like we've got here, which allows a much more subtler, calmer feel to your photography. which this morning or evening looks very calm with the nice reflections on the water here. So it's all about thinking about where your light is when you're doing landscape photography. And I often say to people to think about how you feel when you're out doing photography. So if you're out on a very calm day, generally speaking, you feel very relaxed. So it's about coming up with images that portray that relaxed feel. And when you're out on stormy days at the seaside, for instance, with crashing waves, you might want to take more dramatic shots with the waves and the drama of the sky and create images that evoke that feeling of, drama and that feeling of maybe anger or fear, even if the weather is really wild. And this image just showcases that lovely, relaxing feel that you can get with photography if you shoot the light in the right position at the right times of day. But yeah, again, a great kind of showcase here about how the time of the day your images were taken plays a massive role in your photography. And again, a very well shot image. So yeah, that's all the images we have for this evening. I have a question here from Nick who asks, what conditions would you suggest using a polarizing filter? So really, I think it depends more on your subject matter. So I tend to use polarizing filters for a lot of shoots. It really, to me, the weather doesn't always play an effect. For instance, if you're shooting on a sunny day, the polarizing filter allows you to bring out more of the blues in the sky, but it can also allow a lot of that light that's reflecting on water to be kind of taking that sheen off of it. But equally, if you're shooting on a rainy day, polarizers work incredibly well, especially when you're in the woodlands. And with autumn coming up, if you go into the woodland on a misty morning or a wet day when the leaves are covered in that water from the rain, and you use your polarizing filter, it brings out the saturation incredibly well. And equally, if sometimes you're shooting on quite a dull day, you can use your polarizer and it makes some of the darker elements of the landscape, whether that's the clouds or the water, a little bit more darker, which can often make your images look amazing in black and white or bring out contrast in parts of your images where there wasn't without the polarizer. So I personally think you can use a polarizer in all conditions and all weathers, but really the direction from the sun that you use a polarizer plays the biggest part in this. So they often say that polarizing filters work at their best in 90 degrees from the sun. So you're going to get the most polarized effect if the sun is 90 degrees from where you're shooting, but you'll still get some effect if you're using it shooting into the sun or in the opposite direction, but it won't be quite as harsh or quite as obvious. So yeah, I'd say play around with polarizers. I often find when you play around with them, they sometimes end up creating results that you weren't expecting, bringing out definition in the clouds and whatnot. So yeah, it's a great thing to play around with there. So yeah, I've got a question here about a full frame camera as well. Is a full frame camera I'm not quite sure what you mean there. I'm almost wondering whether you're wondering whether full frame versus a crop sensor and whether it's a necessity potentially. Is that, I think that's possibly what you're asking there. I've only used a full frame camera for about 2 years now. Before that, I always used crop sensors. And really, when it comes to doing landscape photography and using filters and that, it does not matter what camera you own. For instance, full frames and crop sensors, they're both incredible. And the only difference really with your full frame is, generally speaking, you've got a bigger sensor. So when you're taking images, you can often get wider shots because you've got that full frame sensor. And whereas when you're shooting with a crop sensor, you tend to have a smaller, your images tend to be slightly more cropped because you're using a crop sensor. So I often find landscape photography, for instance, that when you see these really wide open scenes, quite often they've been shot with full frames and wide angle lenses. But like I say, I shot all my landscape images on a crop sensor camera until 2 years ago. And for me, I didn't notice too much of a difference. Yes, they're slightly more cropped in, but in that instance, you just walk further back in order to get the same image. You just have to be slightly different, and slightly further away from the scene than if you were using a full frame camera. So yeah, I wouldn't say to people to be hung up on whether you've got a crop sensor or whether you've got a full frame, because they're both fantastic cameras. It's the photographer behind the camera that takes the images and that will make the photographs, not the camera itself. So no matter what camera you have, just learn how to use it and you can take amazing photographs. The best photographers know their cameras and their lenses and their equipment off by heart. It's not the camera itself that takes the images, it's the photographer. So always remember that. So yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to all the photographers who submitted images to us tonight. It's been lovely to sit down and speak through your images. Again, I say the standard, all these images have been fantastic, so there's not really been much for me to critique, but I hope that some of you watching will have been able to gain some tips from this evening. And next month we'll be back with the normal scenes. We'll be back for interviewing another photographer next month. So a bit like what we did with Stephen last month, we'll be doing that again next month with somebody else and back to our normal setup. So yeah, thank you again for watching and taking your time out this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you.